Hi there. So I thought I'd do something different and talk to the screen for a change. Rather than writing. And, maybe everyone else is getting turned off by these huge, supposedly written pieces that are being churned out by AI these days, which I'm finding quite sickening. So anyway, here I am talking to the screen. And I wanted to just try talking a little bit about this concept in my work, which I call the Serpent Spine. Because again, I don't see many people going deep enough into this idea and into this region of the body. So the way we work with it, we work with it in many ways because it's incredibly deep. But the actual physical center of the body, the spine, when we work with the spine in movement practice, like a lot of us have this idea of flexion, extension and side bending and rotation and things. But very few people take the time to work through the spine segment by segment. And when we do actually go in smaller segments, maybe not necessarily one vertebra at a time initially, but just in smaller segments, and when we work through and start to actively seek out just like forwards and backwards flexion extension movements and side to side movements at different segments of the spine, so the top of the neck, middle of the neck, bottom of the neck, the top of the chest, center of the chest, the bottom of the chest, and then several segments through the thoracic spine and through the lumbar spine. When we actually start to get segmented movement of the spine, we find very obviously that the spine is an undulating structure. So yes, we have things like neutral spine and like these global actions, like the whole spine flexing and the whole spine extending, the whole spine bending laterally and the whole spine rotating. But we discover, when we work segment by segment, we discover that the spine has this ability to create these undulating, rippling movements where the whole spine can be partly flexing, partly extending, partly side bending, partly rotating at different sections of the spine. So the whole spine has this incredible complexity, these snake-like movements built into it, so to speak. So we discover in the center of the human body these movements which are inherent in all animal bodies with a spine, starting with the bodies of fish. Well, bodies of worms even, but certainly once there's a bony spine, the bodies of fish. And so we find these fish-like, these serpentine movements built into the segmented structure in the central axis of the human body. So we find the serpent spine as the anatomical core of the human body, from the mouth and the eyes down to the tailbone. And these movements feel very pleasant, especially as they get smoother and more as the segments free up and these waves can move through the segments of the spine, of the central axis, they feel very pleasant, very good, often very joyful, and often like this kind of massagey, wriggly, like squirmy kind of pleasure, which is like, in normal society, almost like not acceptable. Here in Australia, at least, it's like it's not acceptable. You can't be like squirming and undulating the center of your body, and definitely not enjoying it. Certain dance communities, that's okay, but in normal Australian culture, that's definitely not encouraged. But in other parts of the world, it is. It's celebrated. It's like this undulation of the central axis is celebrated and encouraged, and these like undulating, kind of gyrating movements of the central axis of the body are actively encouraged, with an acknowledgement that they are animal, they are animalistic, they are like emerging from the living world with this like embodied joy of being in a physical body. And so, you know, it's like there's a sexual element, which is like, again, like in Australia, like no, definitely not pleasure, not sexual. That's like not okay to express. And so we're locked up when we start exploring these movements. You know, we discover, as we start working through the different segments of our bodies, we discover that most of us are locked up and held through many segments of the central axis of the body. Which takes us into this other whole aspect of it as a bodywork aspect of like finding which sections in the neck, in the thoracic spine attached to the ribs, in the lumbar spine, like on the, you know, on the back of the abdomen, which segments are tight and chronically held and locked up. And those segments all have like huge groups of muscles radiating off them. So if it's the neck, then, you know, large muscle groups radiating off to the shoulders and through the throat and the vocal cords. If it's through the thoracic spine, then obviously those sections of the spine have ribs attaching to them and the muscles attaching to the shoulders and arms and the chest and so on, connections with the diaphragm, and then through the abdomen, connections down through the hips and so on. And so we find those sections which are locked up are having huge effects on our overall posture, our movement capabilities, and you know, our ability to move freely and spontaneously and responding and reacting with our body to the, you know, activities of life, and like athletic activities and dancing, of course. But also we find that each of these segments which each of us has, which tend to be either really tense and locked up, or like dark and we can't feel them and we can't move them and we can't like activate them and can't release them, that these sections, they are limiting not just our physical capabilities, but they're limiting our physical expression. And so they can be affecting our posture massively, so keeping our necks hunched over in a particular way, or keeping our chests pulled open and never closed, so contraction in the back, which is keeping the front of the body open, but the back is very tense, contractions in the lower back, and so on. And so they're keeping us held in a small range of the many possible postures that our bodies are able to take, which then means that there's a huge link to the range of expression of our character, where if we're held in a certain way, always with the chest up, then that's a particular expression of character. If we're held in a particular way, always with the neck in a particular way, again, these different postures are conveying cultural information and emotional information, emotional expression being conveyed by our posture, but also being in some ways restricted by our posture, in that it's easier to feel certain kinds of expansive emotions and so on with certain kinds of expansive postures. It's easier to feel like different qualities of emotion when the body's able to express those emotions. So like we see in children and babies, a full expression of the emotions that they're feeling in the postures and movements of their bodies. Whereas as we get to adulthood, we've learned, this is normal and good, we've learned to hide, essentially, most of our emotional life and not express it in the postures and movements of the body. But those tension patterns are still there. So when we feel those emotions, there's still the urge to move and change our body shape in particular ways, but it's held inside. And so those tension patterns are kind of moving and not expressed inside us. And then if they never get expressed and never move, then these tension patterns can become really, really deep, really, really held aspects of our character, which we never move out of. So a lot of people will have like tension patterns around the rib cage that are just held locked, and they no longer are able to release that tension, and may not have any idea that it's there, may not even feel it at all. It's just become normal. The base sort of set pattern of the body is locked in these particular ways, and then that's just me. That just becomes me. And it's a tension pattern which is changeable, but it's become locked. So as we start to go through these different segments of the spine, and we find some of them we can move really easily and it feels nice. Others, it's a bit of a struggle to feel them and move them, and it might feel like, a bit gunky, a bit sort of stuck, but we can move it a bit. Others, we find like it's like, wow, we firstly either can't move them at all, or when we try to move them, it feels really horrible, or we can't even feel them. Someone's tapping on a certain part of our spine and going, move this bit backwards, forwards and backwards, and like, I can't even feel that particular part. And then, so through working like this, we get a gradually improving ability to feel the parts that are difficult to feel, to move the parts that are difficult to move, and then gradually to make those movements feel better. Initially they can feel horrible, and then we work through them, gradually get them moving more and more and more. It gets easier to take our awareness into those parts and move them, and then we get the skill of moving them in ways that feel nice, and then we want to move them more, and then the movements open up, and then the body part opens up, and then the awareness sinks deeper into that body part, and it all can start to feel nice. And gradually the whole central axis can start to get these undulating movements which feel really good, and the very center of our body can change from being like dark and blocky and yucky and stuck and stiff and full of like gross, horrible tensions that we don't want to move because they feel so yucky, and we can open it all up until the whole central axis can feel pleasant and mobile and soft but powerful and even joyful and blissful. as well as beginning to have these ancient undulating movements, which show us and help us feel where we come from, that we're emerging from the ancient oceans and coming from hundreds of millions of years of like undulating and running through the forests and slinking our ways through the trees and so on.